And for more, we have Steven Webster, Associate Professor of Political Science at Indiana University, joining us live. Well, Steven, from what you heard in Mr. Biden's interview with ABC, has he managed to douse fears and really convince Americans about his mental fitness to lead for another 4 more years?
I don't think this episode is going to be behind the president. The reality is that even before the debate against Donald Trump, many Americans were skeptical about Joe Biden's ability to perform his duties as president if he were to be given another 4 years. I think the sort of effect of that debate was to solidify many of those fears. And I don't think a 20-minute interview with ABC is going to be sufficient to assuage fears that many voters have about Joe Biden. Now, he's also given some campaign rallies, trying to be out in public and really sort of project stamina and energy. The reality is that it's going to take quite a bit. Even these attempts that the president has been engaged in so far, he's made a few of his somewhat classic Joe Biden gaffes, saying that he was going to beat Donald Trump in 2020, when of course he means 2024. And so any small mistake like this that Joe Biden makes is going to create a sort of large imprint in voters' minds.
Well, at least 4 Democratic congressmen have called for President Biden to step aside for a fitter candidate, despite Democratic governors saying that they're behind him. How divisive is the issue, and how could replacing him at this really late stage backfire for the party?
I think the uncertainty about what would happen if Joe Biden were to step aside and be replaced by another candidate is part of the reason that you see this inherent tension and awkwardness playing out in the Democratic Party. So we've had 4 elected Democrats, all of whom are serving in the House of Representatives, call for Joe Biden to step aside. There's rumors that a group of senators led by Mark Warner from Virginia are planning to meet on Monday to discuss perhaps encouraging Biden to step aside as well. But the fact that no one of really any significance in the Democratic Party, like the Speaker, or rather the Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, has come out to pressure Biden, suggests that Democratic politicians aren't really sure how to proceed here. This is a very delicate thing, trying to get your party's leader to step aside for somebody else. And so I think many Democratic politicians are going to wait and see what subsequent polling data suggests about what Americans really think about Joe Biden's fitness to serve as 4 more years in the White House.
Right, and how much of an advantage has Biden's debate debacle been for rival Donald Trump?
The sort of unique thing about American politics these days is that most of what voters are doing is trying to vote against candidates and parties they dislike rather than for candidates and parties that they like. And Donald Trump is not particularly liked by many voters. And so anytime he is not in the news, but rather his opponent is in the news, this is a win for him. I think any Democratic strategist would love to make this election a referendum on Donald Trump and what his presidency was like. And right now, what the media is discussing is Joe Biden's fitness for office rather than what Donald Trump did when he was in office or what he proposes to do should he regain control of the White House. And so I think any day that goes by where Donald Trump is not the center of the news cycle is good for him and arguably just as bad for Joe Biden.
There's also been lots of talks about replacement nominees. Kamala Harris is set to be the likely person to really step in should Mr. Biden decide to bow out. Well, do you think she's prepared, and will voters welcome such an unprecedented move?
It's hard to say. Kamala Harris did not do particularly well in the 2020 Democratic primary. And so her detractors point to that as perhaps one reason why she shouldn't be the party's nominee if Joe Biden steps aside. On the other hand, she's the most logical choice. She was chosen as Joe Biden's vice president. And so people know she's a part of the ticket. In many ways, it would be easier for her to step in and assume the role as the party's nominee should Joe Biden step aside. And there would be some advantages there if you're a Democrat. And one of those advantages is that she would have access to many of the campaign funds that the Biden campaign has already raised. So this would give her a significant advantage over any potential rival, such as one of the governors that get mentioned quite a bit. I think logistically, she's the most likely person to replace Joe Biden should such a scenario emerge. But again, this uneasiness about whether Kamala Harris would be better at the job or more equipped at beating Donald Trump, or whether this is something that Joe Biden is best equipped to do, is really driving the uncertainty and the uneasiness here about what the Democratic ticket is going to look like for this election.
Indeed. So, one last question before we let you go, Stephen. While age appears to be working against Mr. Biden, Donald Trump himself isn't that young. He's 78. Could this episode spur both sides to really seek younger candidates in future? What do American voters think?
I think many American voters are concerned about the age of our elected officials. You have, as you've mentioned, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but you can look in the House of Representatives, you can look in the Senate. Lest we forget, Mitch McConnell had some health-related scares here this year, and this sort of began to raise this issue about the age of American politicians. And so I do think most Americans would prefer to have younger candidates in positions of leadership. I think both parties are likely to draw that lesson from the 2024 election. But I think right now the most likely scenario is that we still have Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But I don't think Joe Biden has put these concerns about his age and his mental acuity behind him just yet.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Associate Professor Steven Webster from Indiana University joining us.